this is Lindy Kaiser with clearancejobs.com and Jill Hamilton with clearancejobs.com. We're bringing you a live clearance jobs update on 420 to talk about what Jill just reminded me is clearly one of my favorite topics to write about on clearance jobs, which is drug use and your security clearance. It's a hot topic because it just generates a lot of questions and a lot of news articles. So clearly you did some research prior to the call, Jill. So I just have to ask you, talk about drug use and security clearances on the Clearance Jobs news site. Maybe what are some of the top articles or hot topics around drug use in your clearance that continue to come up?
Right. I think a lot of the recent changes in either state laws or rumblings of changes at the federal level definitely brings up a lot of interest. And yeah, you've written a lot about it. But, like ODNI's released some updates. And sometimes that clarifies and sometimes it just keeps things a little bit muddy. Then you see the intelligence community respond differently than perhaps the DoD community might. And that also brings a lot of questions. We get a lot of questions from our readers every time, like, more states legalize marijuana. It's like, is everything good now? Are we good to go? And then there's also just like different ways to work through the whole process. If perhaps your past has this, or there's things that, there's a medical struggle that you have that you've heard medicinal marijuana might help. People want to know, how can I keep my job and partake in what everybody else in the world seems to be doing, right? So all those questions come up. So yeah, you are a top writer on it, but we do have a lot of articles on. If you just search marijuana on our site, you will see a list and just which bills have introduced more changes and all the like.
Because I write about what the people want to know, Jill, and
exactly.
we get a lot of questions about it. I like Heather when you're asking about drug use and clearance. Heather said nope, just a big nope, which is a good policy to take. Like, that is the best policy. Just say no to drugs. We did it. We did a white paper about drug use and security clearances. We did one last year, but actually enough has changed. Like you mentioned, the changing policies. That's a part of the issue here, is that Congress introduces new legislation. States introduce every year there's new states that legalize different forms of it. So it just creates a lot of confusion. So we have a new version of that white paper that released, that dropped today. So definitely, check it out. We'll have the link here. But that's why we get questions about it, because the policies are changing, things change. And if you're just tuning in, we have all kinds of people joining us now. You're like, why are you wearing tie-dye? Because it's 420 and we're talking about drug use and security clearance considerations for clearance holders. So check out our most recent white paper on it. We talk about ODNI issued clarifying guidance about drug use in your security clearance in December. But as you said, we have that clarifying guidance, but we also have individual agencies are kind of interpreting it their own way. So I know we've covered this on the news site and talked about intelligence community, other agencies. They have their own kind of policies about how long to abstain from drug use before applying for a security clearance. Is that a topic you've seen come up? Do we have content about that on the news site?
We do, because some of them are more about suitability, where, Intel community has some suitability criteria in addition to what you have on your SF-86. But, and then it does look at, there's just so many nuances, like you brought up the whole person concept before, where they do want the whole picture, and they want to know, is this is going to be a factor in your ongoing trust with classified information and how you perform on the job. Is this a secret that you're keeping from people in your family? That's a problem. So I think it doesn't really matter where in the country you live, whether or not you can partake. It really, because of the federal, it's at the federal level. So that's what the security clearance policy goes by.
Yeah, Barry just asked that. He was like, so basically, no, regardless of where you live, don't. That's the answer. Yes, that is the answer. But that is the confusing part. And I've seen this come up in denials and revocations. And I think that's a part of the issue. Some people have mistakenly thought, hey, I was using drugs in a state where it was legal, and so I should be okay with it. I saw a recent case where somebody, even the SF-86 asks if you've done illegal drugs in the past 7 years, and then also ask if you plan to continue to use drugs. And someone actually said, yes, they had, and yes, they plan to continue, and somehow thought that because it was legal at the state level, that would be okay for their security clearance. So that's why read my more than 100 articles at clearance jobs before you apply for a
106. It's
security clearance.
106.
106. I could have told you that is where the rubber meets the road. That's the OD&I policy. If you indicate you intend, and the issue is he tried to go back and say, hey, oh, just joke, I didn't realize that. The government does not actually generally look favorably upon you didn't do enough research about the process before you applied.
Right.
So even though you were like, oh, I'm in a state where it's legal, I just thought that was okay. Because even the prescription, the medicinal drug use is issue too. I've had people say, like, my spouse has a prescription for drug use. I again, I feel the pain of folks who are like, hey, this is like a prescribed substance in my state, but the government is still going to look at the federal law versus the state law.
Right. And even then, it could take time to change with the security clearance process. But I actually think you bring up a good point with the spouse thing, or some people I live with, or my roommates, or that's why there's so many nuanced things to this. Sean Begley, one of our writers, who's also a clearance attorney, brought up marijuana prenuptial agreements this past week. That it's actually a thing where people are writing prenuptial agreements to show the government that they've taken the steps necessary to make sure that that it's separate. They've agreed to not partake while in the house or have their own system somewhere else. So there's no factor upon the cleared person. So, it is there's all these different factors. So maybe it's, CBD gummies that you didn't realize had higher amounts of THC in them because that's not FDA like tracked or approved necessarily. So, then you fail a drug test. Well, that's going to have a lot of challenges ahead. So I just think there's just so many different little ways this plays out for people that they're just not realizing are going to impact them. So it's important to actually look at all the different ways.
Yeah. And we got a few comments from people saying, this is ridiculous. Like, if I've done drugs ever, I'm never going to get a clearance. Like, no, don't weed yourself out of the process, as we say. If you have past drug use, you can still obtain a clearance. I think that was the big takeaway from OD&I's clarifying guidance is they get Congress, is introducing legislation again. The Senate is going to be, introducing, I don't know if anything will pass, but there's a clear public policy shift to say we get that there's a bit of a disconnect with these 37 states who have legalized some form of it. The main thing is just to abstain. Again, like I said, the applicant who said he intended to continue using drugs, that's just a hard hurdle to overcome. But if you say, hey, I've done it in the past, especially if you can show it's like college related, or like you said, even with the prenup, creating some kind of documentation around, I did this at this time. This was a part of this lifestyle. I've moved on. And 1 year of abstinence is the gold standard. If you have 1 year between you and drug use, you have a decent chance in whether it's the IC or DOD or other agencies. And I've seen more recent, I've seen 3 months. So I say 1 year, but we always say like it's the whole person concept. So even if it hasn't been a full year, depending on the position, don't necessarily take yourself out of the process. And like in the comments have come up like, yeah, FBI, DEA, I mean, they're just DEA, you're going to have a different problem. Like, look, consider the agency that you're applying to. I think that makes a difference. And like suitability, which you mentioned, is going to be a factor in the clear. And you're the one that highlighted the congressional, kind of what's going on. Do you think that applicants are kind of following that and hoping that, congressional change will help move the needle, or should that be something that clearance holders continue to follow?
I definitely think people should continue to follow it, just from staying informed, but also because it affects on every level, whether you're somebody who wants to partake or you've got people on staff that you're managing and things that you used to watch for before, or like kind of red flags that like the go-to things that you always knew that you're supposed to be tracking, all that kind of thing. Suddenly that's going to change on you. So whether it's something you're interested for yourself or not, it's something that's going to impact the entire workforce. So it is something to keep your eye on, just in how you interact and to know what changes are ahead. So
Yeah. And I always say, like, follow the policy, but also don't go out and like plan a reefer madness party if you see Congress approve something. Because if you work for the federal government, I mean, we've had a few comments that are like, federal government jobs are just different. They are a different. DOD has its own policies. Oh, we've got to talk about CBD products because you mentioned that earlier. Because CBD products, like the OD&I clarifying guidance had like a hefty buyer beware, watch out what you purchase when it comes to CBD. But DOD has its own separate ban already on using CBD products, at least for active duty. So, yeah, there's not a green light on CBD per se.
Well, I think the thing to think with that one too, especially if you're in a job, like if you're a civilian who could, or I'm assuming military would have I've never been in the military, but have random drug tests. You can get called up at any time. I don't know that contractors always run the gamut through that, but I know that at least civilian employees do. With the varying levels in CBD gummies, it's not regulated, and so you could test positive for marijuana and you just were taking your vitamins, So
I just wanted to fall asleep safely at night, Jill. That's what they told me on the package. Yeah. No, I think
promised.
That's what they say, basically buyer beware and know your product. And I think there are some CBD products out there that have actually branded themselves as being like tested and below a certain amount, but the issue is just the prevalence of them, because they're just, they're at your pharmacy counter. It seems like those kind of products are everywhere, and especially you're layering a whole different products on product. That's where you do come into an issue, and you're testing if you end up testing positive. I think Sean has written about that. Sean Bigley, security clearance attorney, has written about the CBD issue, and even some folks who have lost their clearance because they tested positive on a drug test and it was CBD.
Right.
So.
Right. I think I've read somewhere where you can actually get like maybe at-home tests. I don't know how accurate that would be, but if you know that there's a possibility you might get called in soon, I don't know, or don't use them at all. Actually.
Well, I mean, just because, I think, like I say, it's a pro and con. We've had several people, note in the comments like, hey, your health is worth it. I mean, I think you have to consider the portfolio of, is this the only product that you can use to do this job? Speak with an herbalist, a naturalist. Maybe there is something beyond THC that could help you. I don't know. I wear tie-dye, but it's a misnomer. I don't have a lot of herbal knowledge for what could help, but just know if you have a security clearance, the drug use issue is still definitely a factor. And we saw a slight uptick in security clearance denials and revocations due to drug issues last year. And I think we're going to continue to see that just because more people have it, not because the government wants to deny more clearances based on it. I think they've made it really clear. It's kind of there between a rock and a hard place. It's just really hard. You're expected to adhere to federal law, and drugs are still illegal at the federal level. And that's something I think I kind of teased to this nuance before. You have the catch-22 of some people claim ignorance, but some people have claimed, actually, another denial kind of arena I've seen is folks who say, I knew that it was illegal at the federal level, but I did it anyway because my state had it legal. That becomes almost a personal conduct issue in the clearance process, because they're like, you actually willfully violated a federal law. So it's not actually the drug issue. It's that I knew it was a federal law. I disagreed with the federal law and I did it anyway.
Yeah.
The government has a hard time with that, with clearances, because they want people that follow rules. So our white paper, it talks about tips for mitigating drug use that you've potentially had in the past. One of those ways to do it is to kind of separate yourself from former drug users, create a new lifestyle. You kind of mentioned that with the security clearance, the marijuana prenups. I don't know what those are. Are there any other ways to kind of lifestyle shifting recommendations?
I mean, I obviously, if there's been, we talk about, where there's just been recreational use or medicinal marijuana, but like if ever like drugs were a problem, establishing like how you've gone about mitigating this in your life, whether you've gone, it's same thing with like alcohol or anything like that. Because people have mentioned like, what about alcohol? People turn to that, and I get that. That's actually a fair point. But just addressing those head on, and then showing the steps that you've taken, showing changes that you made. You've also mentioned the 1 year mark with drugs use being kind of like this number that's been thrown out there in the cleared community of like at least wait a year. Um, and honestly, if it was from college, you might not even have to wait that whole year. Youth has a way of them like, ah, there, little one. So we've been there, that kind of mentality. And it's funny too, because you say we do talk a lot about this more and more now. And part of that's also because I think it was so cut and dry before. There really wasn't much talk about. It was, I mean, I grew up with, a dare, right?
I told you my Nancy Reagan memories. I mean, I have to say that was the 80s kids. We had those.
Right.
Yeah. Just say no.
That's right. And now my mom might be like, hey, there's this great CBD oil. And I'm like, I don't know how to bring these two worlds together.
So we live in the world of gray. Welcome to the world of gray. It was just easier when it was black and white. The black and white days of the 1980s. Let's go back there, people. It's too hard for us. We have so much nuance.
But I think because of that nuance, and then like it's hard to, I think even for people to come out very clear and definitive, even though it is kind of clear and definitive when you're facing a denial or revocation. Clearly there's some hard yeses and nos to the marijuana debate when it comes to your security clearance. So
yeah. But again, I say don't weed yourself out. I'll keep saying it.
True.
Like if you have drug use, you're passive. I think the OD9 clarifying guidance, the information we're getting from the government and from agencies is saying, hey, we get that this is more prevalent. The state use is making it a bit of an issue. But like you said, youthful indiscretion is one thing, or youthful drug use. I will say I've seen a lot of the security clearance, the uptick in denials or revocations are people who are habitual drug users who have used drugs for the past 20 years. And it's kind of like the people who have defaulted, who are losing their security clearances for not paying their student loans, but claiming there was a deferment, but actually they weren't paying their student loans 5 years ago when there wasn't a deferment. And they're like, there's a deferment. And they're like, government's like, no, I mean, you can't layer new laws on top of old indiscretions.
Right.
That also applies to some of the drug use issues. So we see people who have been using drugs for 10 years and they're like, wait, it's legal now. I'm like, well, it wasn't legal in your state when you started using. The fact that they granted you clemency at some point along the way, you still have an issue. And the pattern of behavior, we're getting old, Jill. We like to read books about habits, right? Or like habit forming things. If you've been doing drugs for 20 years, the government just knows you have more of a likelihood of lapsing back into that lifestyle than you were doing drugs in college. I don't know if that's ageism, or I don't know if that's wrong or right. The drug and I don't know, psychological experts can chime in there, but I do feel like that's how they're applying the policies, is that there is a difference between.
Well, I think it goes back to that whole person concept where there are reasons. It's not like it's a hard and fast, you've ever done drugs, hard pass, no. So they are looking at all the reasonings behind it, what it was, because that also makes a difference, and how long it's gone on. Like you mentioned, if this is like a 10-year thing that you started before any changes started to make place, well, then that means you were actually keeping it a secret and you weren't putting it on when you came up for a reinvestigation back in the day when there were all the reinvestigations, like you weren't adding that information there. You weren't self-reporting or any of that stuff. So there's all these other issues that come along with that if you've had long-term drug use throughout the years in your cleared position, if you already are holding a security clearance. So
Schuler's talking about drug use versus drug abuse. It's reminding me of my favorite talk about this. It actually doesn't even talk about drug use. It's drug involvement. That's why the drug business issue has been big. I got questions this year from a CPA in Colorado who had built a business doing the books for a number of drug businesses, which I thought was probably pretty genius. But then he wanted to apply for a federal government job. And he was like, his whole work portfolio involved associations with drug users. I could actually see that being an issue for a denial or revocation because the guideline says drug involvement. So that includes direct investment in a drug business. They've clarified, they don't care about your mutual funds or an indirect investment. We're seeing more of that option out there. But if you're involved with illegal drugs, even if you're not using illegal drugs, you could be denied a clearance.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so true. And it's probably because, government realized even their mutual funds that they have, they couldn't guarantee that, federal employees, their TSP program didn't have marijuana investments somewhere along the line. So if we can't reasonably say it for all our employees that are in the system, then we're gonna make that caveat that
gonna give you a pass, people.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's worth knowing. So the drug issue with the state legalization has created kind of a broader use case for reasons for denial and revocation. We have, the CBD products with THC in them. We have all of the drug business opportunities out there. And then certainly like what you see with actual just legit drug use. So we have a few comments, people asking, hey, no, you can invest. Justin, still invest. Just don't invest in your brother's drug business. Don't give him cash and say, like, buy drugs with it or something.
Right.
Like, you just can't. Broad portfolio investments are still fine, even if there's drugs there. The government's not looking through your 401k. They're not.
Right.
They're not digging that deep. But yeah, several questions asking, hey, how do I find out more? Katie has been blowing up the chat thread with all kinds of articles. Thank you, Katie Keller, for filling us with all kinds of news and information there. So you can check those out. But also, if you're applying for a security clearance and you have questions about this, definitely go to clearancejobs.com, where we have more than 100 articles about drug use and your security clearance. You're welcome. On that note, anything else, Jill?
I think we ran the whole gamut at this point, at least,
Did it all. Is this recorded? We hope not. LinkedIn user. I don't know. Yes, it is. It'll be. The internet never deletes this stuff. So if people can see me in my tie-dye later. Now I get to wear this all day and have people wonder. It's for work. It's a work outfit. So for more on drug use and through security clearance, visit all of our articles at clearancejobs.com. Thank you so much, Jill. Happy 420.
Thanks.
Just say no, kids. Just say no. That's all I got.